When did you realize your parents were bad at parenting? Story 1. When I turned 12, my mom handed me a credit card with my name on it. Not for emergencies, for groceries. She sat me down at our kitchen table with this massive stack of manufacturer coupons she'd been collecting and said, "You're smart enough to handle the shopping now. I trust you more than myself with money." At first I felt so incredibly grown up, walking through Walmart alone every Tuesday and Friday, pushing a full-sized cart while other kids my age were begging their parents for candy. They'd stare at me like I was some kind of alien. The cashiers all knew me by name within a month. "Back again, honey," Linda would say, automatically helping me reach the heavy detergent bottles on the top shelf. She started setting aside the markdown meat for me when it was about to expire. I learned which cereals had the best protein-to-cost ratio, how to spot when the rotisserie chickens were about to be discounted. I could stretch $80 into 2 full weeks of meals for our family of 4, and I was genuinely proud of it. I had this whole elaborate system. Mondays I'd plan the weekly menu based on store flyers and whatever coupons we had. Tuesdays I'd hit Walmart for the bulk items and household essentials. Fridays I'd go to the smaller grocery store for fresh produce and whatever we'd run out of during the week. Other parents would see me in the cereal aisle comparing unit prices with a calculator, and they'd do these obvious double takes. One woman actually followed me around the store for 20 minutes, then approached me by the checkout. "Sweetie, are you shopping for your family?" she asked really gently. When I nodded and showed her my organized list with meal plans written in the margins, she looked absolutely horrified. She asked if my parents were okay, if there was an adult she could call for me. I just told her what Mom always said, that I was mature for my age, and this was a good life experience that would serve me well as an adult. During parent-teacher conferences in October, my teacher mentioned how I always ate the free breakfast at school, even though we technically weren't on the reduced lunch program. "She's incredibly responsible for her age," my teacher told my mom. "Yesterday she told me she handles all the household shopping and meal planning. I was actually impressed by how much she knows about nutrition labels and budgeting." Mom laughed like it was the cutest story she'd ever heard. Kids grow up so fast these days. She's always been my little helper around the house. But my teacher's smile completely faded. She leaned forward and said very quietly, "She's 12 years old. 12-year-olds shouldn't be grocery shopping alone or managing family nutrition. That's not age-appropriate responsibility. That's parentification." That's when it hit me like a freight truck. I started thinking about my friends' actual lives. Sarah's mom packed her lunch every single day with little notes. Mike's dad took him grocery shopping on Saturdays, and Mike would just carelessly throw random stuff in the cart without checking prices. None of my friends knew which pasta brand had the most fiber per dollar. None of them had to calculate whether we could afford both milk and eggs that week. None of them felt crushing guilt for wanting name-brand crackers instead of the store brand. The school counselor called it parentification when she pulled me aside the next week. She explained that children shouldn't be responsible for adult tasks like managing household necessities and family nutrition. That same counselor helped me understand that other kids got to actually be kids. They didn't stress about whether there would be enough food until payday. They didn't know that you could ask the deli counter to slice lunch meat thinner to make it last longer, or that shopping after 8 p.m. got you better markdowns. I'm 19 now and I still catch myself obsessively checking unit prices on everything. But I also understand that my childhood got stolen one coupon at a time, one adult responsibility at a time. I'm actually grateful for those skills now. I can budget better than most adults my age, and I never waste food. But I'll never make my future kids choose between being children and keeping the family fed. Story 2. When I was 7, my dad would make me count his tip money every night after his shift at the restaurant. He'd dump all these crumpled bills on my bed and hand me a little notebook where I had to write down the total. He told me it was to help me get better at math, and I believed him because I was struggling in school. But one night I counted wrong. I wrote $87 when it was actually $78, and instead of just correcting my mistake, he grabbed my arm so hard it left marks and said we'd have to start all over. He made me count 5 times in a row until almost midnight, even though I had school the next day. The next morning at breakfast, he acted like nothing happened. He even made me pancakes and told me I was getting really good at counting. I remember feeling confused because I thought maybe I'd imagined how angry he got. A few days later, I was at my friend Trevor's house, and his dad came home from work. He emptied his pockets on the kitchen counter, and I immediately stood up and asked if he wanted me to count it. Trevor looked at me weird, and his dad just laughed and said, "No, buddy, that's not your job." On the way home, Trevor asked why I thought I had to count his dad's money. I told him about my counting job, and he said, "That's messed up. My dad says child labor is illegal." I didn't know what that meant exactly, but it stuck with me. The next time my dad dumped his tips on my bed, I noticed something. The money smelled like beer and cigarettes, not food from the restaurant. And there were always way more singles than made sense for a waiter. I started watching him more carefully and realized he wasn't even going to the restaurant most nights. He'd leave in nice clothes but come back smelling like smoke with red eyes. One day I decided to follow him. I told my mom I was sleeping over at Trevor's, but instead I rode my bike to where my dad's car was parked. It wasn't at the restaurant. It was behind this rundown building with neon signs. I peeked through a window and saw him dealing cards at a table with men smoking cigars. That night I learned my dad wasn't a waiter. He was running an illegal poker game, and he wasn't having me count money to teach me math. He was using me as his accountant because if he got caught, he could say I just made up numbers because I was a kid. The worst part came a few weeks later when two men showed up at our door asking for my dad. My mom told them he wasn't home. But one of them said, "Tell him Joey wants the $200 his kid miscounted." I froze on the stairs, knowing it was my mistake that night when I wrote down the wrong number. After they left, my mom just sat at the kitchen table crying. I asked her if Dad was in trouble, and she said, "Your father's always in trouble." That's when she told me she'd been saving money to leave him for months. She just hadn't found the right time. 3 days later, while my dad was at work, we packed our things and moved to my grandma's house. My dad showed up there once, pounding on the door at 2 a.m., yelling that he needed his Lucky Charm back. He meant me. My grandma called the police, and when they came, they found betting slips and someone else's credit cards in his wallet. He got arrested right there on her front lawn, the day of his court hearing. My mom let me stay home from school. She sat me down and apologized for letting him use me like that. She said, "I thought I was protecting you by staying, but I was just teaching you that it's okay to be used." I still struggle with math to this day, but not because I'm bad at it, because every time I count money, I remember how it felt to know my dad saw me as a tool, not a son. Story 3. At 8 years old, I became the family doctor. Mom called it my special talent. It started when she cut her hand cooking. Instead of going to the ER, she called me downstairs and handed me a needle, thread, and rubbing alcohol. Remember those YouTube videos we watched? Just like sewing a button? My hand shook as I made 5 clumsy stitches across her palm. She beamed with pride. "See? Saved us a $500 hospital bill." After that, I treated everything. Dad's sprained ankle, Mom's migraine, my sister's earache. I memorized dosages, learned to read prescription labels, and could spot the difference between flu and strep. By age 10, our medicine cabinet had no childproof caps. Mom said those were for families with stupid kids. I thought all children did this until career day in 5th grade. I stood up and announced I wanted to be a doctor because I already am one at home. My teacher's face went white. Later that day, she asked about my pretend doctor game. I showed her the notebook where I tracked everyone's medications. She asked to borrow it and made a copy for a project. 2 days later, a social worker showed up. Mom was furious, telling me on the drive home that I'd betrayed the family by exaggerating. The case was eventually dismissed. Mom was convincing, and I was too scared to contradict her. But my teacher kept checking in, slipping me articles about medical school scholarships. Years later, in my actual medical residency, a supervisor asked why I seemed so comfortable with emergency procedures. "Lots of practice," I said. "I'm a pediatrician now. When I see parents making their kids carry adult responsibilities, I recognize it immediately. The thing is, real doctors know when they're out of their depth." Story 4. When I was 10, my dad came up with what he called the Independence Project. Every Saturday, he'd drop me off at the city library at 9 a.m. with a water bottle, a granola bar, and a $5 bill, just in case. His words, "You'll learn more here than any babysitter could teach you." Then he'd peel off in our rusted-out Camry with music blasting. At first it was cool. I could roam the aisles like a grown-up, choose my own books, and sit wherever I wanted. No one told me to read quietly. I already knew how to disappear. Miss Lena, the front desk librarian, called me her Saturday student. She'd save old magazines and random bookmarks for me. I thought she was just being nice. Little did I know she was keeping tabs. By the fourth weekend, I had a routine. Read a graphic novel, sneak a nap in the oversized beanbag in the kids' corner, and eat my granola bar near the window where the afternoon sun warmed the carpet. After a few months of this, I started to notice things. Like how my dad never came inside ever. He'd just text out front, and I'd run out. Or how Miss Lena started slipping me snacks without asking if I was hungry. And when I told her I was learning algebra on my own, she said, "You don't homeschool, right?" And I said, "No. I just teach myself on Saturdays." One day I got curious. I pretended to go to the bathroom and instead snuck out the side door to look for my dad's car. I found it all right. Parked at the far end of the lot. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't working. He was sitting in the driver's seat with a foldable chessboard and a laptop, live streaming poker games, talking to a ring light. That night I asked if I could stay home next time. He laughed. "What? And give up your genius training? No way. I need time to focus. This is for our future, kid." That winter I got the flu. I remember curling up in the beanbag, unable to keep my eyes open. Miss Lena brought me a blanket. She thought I was asleep. But I overheard her talking to someone. "He's still not answering. Try the other number." I passed out, and when I woke up, I was in the hospital. But my dad still wasn't there. They tried calling him for 4 hours. Finally, someone tracked him down through his live stream. A moderator posted a comment on his stream chat. "Your kid is in the hospital. Answer your phone." He didn't even pause the stream. Just typed back, "He'll be fine. He's tough." Miss Lena lost it. She printed out security camera stills of me arriving alone week after week. She circled timestamps, logged dates, and brought the evidence to social services. That's how I ended up spending the next few months living with the family of one of the library volunteers. It felt strange at first. Someone asking me what I wanted for dinner. Someone actually showing up when I got sick. Mr. Rione, the volunteer dad, was a mechanic. He took me to the garage and taught me how to fix an engine block before I knew how to parallel park. I still went to the library on Saturdays. But now I had someone walking me in, someone who stayed. The last time I saw Miss Lena, I was 18. I had just gotten into a college on the other side of the state. I'm 20 now. I'm studying automotive engineering. I haven't talked to my dad in 2 years, but I still remember the way he used to say, "You're so independent, kid." Story 5. When I was 9, my mother started what she called character-building exercises. She'd wake me at 3 a.m. on random school nights, hand me a flashlight and stopwatch, and tell me I had 15 minutes to find all 5 keys she'd hidden throughout our sprawling house. "The darkness builds focus," she'd say, sipping coffee while I frantically searched, terrified. "Pressure builds excellence." If I found all 5 keys before the timer beeped, I'd get breakfast. If not, she'd pack nothing for my lunch. I became an expert at silently begging food from classmates. My father never intervened. He'd just slip me granola bars when she wasn't looking. "Your mother has unconventional methods," he'd whisper. "But she's preparing you for a harsh world." By 5th grade, I could pick simple locks, lie convincingly about why I was so tired, and steal food without getting caught. The exercises escalated. When I was 11, she started the independence challenges. She'd drop me in unfamiliar parts of the city with $5 and a dead cell phone. "Find your way home before dinner," she'd say, driving away. I once had to walk 7 miles in the rain after spending my $5 on a wrong bus. I developed trench foot that got infected. The school nurse called home when she saw me limping. "He's always been clumsy," my mother told her. "I'll handle it." Her handling it meant teaching me to dress wounds myself, because hospitals ask too many questions. The breaking point came during my 12th birthday. Instead of a party, she blindfolded me and drove for hours. When she removed the blindfold, we were in a forest I didn't recognize. 3-day survival challenge, she announced, handing me a matchbook and a pocket knife. "I'll be back Monday. There's a ranger station 5 miles north if you give up." She left me there alone as the sun was setting. I lasted one terrifying night before stumbling upon a camping family. The father looked horrified when I explained why I was alone. "Son, "That's not normal," he said gently. "That's not okay." They took me to the ranger station, where I learned we were actually 120 miles from home. The rangers called the police. When questioned, my mother was indignant. "I'm raising a survivor, not a victim," she insisted. The police discovered journals where she documented every exercise in meticulous detail. She'd been planning increasingly dangerous challenges, including leaving me on an island for a week. The psychologist explained that my mother had proxy Munchausen syndrome, creating scenarios to rescue me from to feel important. My father was charged with negligence. I lived with my aunt for 2 years. She cried the first time she saw me make a food stash under my bed. "You don't need to hide food here," she said. "You'll never go hungry as punishment again." I'm 22 now. My mother still sends me survival tips and birthday cards. My father calls monthly to apologize. Last year I became an emergency response volunteer. The coordinator praised my unusual calmness in crisis situations. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing, thinking I hear a stopwatch beeping. My roommate keeps the pantry stocked and visible. That camping family still sends me Christmas cards. "The father taught me how to fish properly last summer. This is how it should have been," he said. I'm studying child psychology now. Not to understand my mother, but to recognize children like me. Story 6. I grew up believing my parents' divorce was my fault. Not in a vague, "it was a stressful time" way, but in a specific, direct causation way. I was a difficult baby. I had colic. I never slept. My mom would tell the story with a sad, weary sigh at family gatherings. "We were so in love before she was born," she'd say, ruffling my hair. "But the stress of a baby like that, it just broke us." My dad never contradicted her. He'd just stare at his shoes. My entire childhood was built on the foundation of that guilt. I was the reason my dad left. I was the reason my mom was a single, struggling parent. I tried to be a perfect, easy, low-maintenance child to make up for the damage I had apparently caused just by existing. I spent 18 years walking on eggshells, apologizing for everything, desperate for my mother's approval. I never asked for much. I got good grades. I didn't get into trouble. I was a model daughter. I thought if I was good enough, I could somehow retroactively fix the past and erase the sin of my birth. The summer after I graduated high school, I was helping my grandmother clean out her attic. We came across a box of old letters. My grandma watched me for a moment, then pulled out a thick stack of them, tied with a faded ribbon. "These are from your mother," she said. "From the year before you were born." My heart pounded. I thought they would be love letters. Proof of the idyllic life I had shattered. I sat on a dusty trunk and started to read. They weren't love letters. They were furious, heartbroken letters from my mother to her sister. And they were all about my father's gambling problem. He had lost their savings. He had taken out secret loans. He had remortgaged the house without telling her. The dates on the letters were a full year before I was even conceived. They were already broken. They were already drowning. It had absolutely nothing to do with me. I wasn't the cause of the storm. I was just born in the middle of it. I sat in that dusty attic, holding the proof that my entire emotional landscape was a lie. My mother hadn't just let me believe I was the cause of her misery. She had actively constructed the narrative. She had used me, a helpless baby, as a convenient scapegoat to avoid the messier, more shameful truth. I went home and put one of the letters on the kitchen table. When she came home, she saw it, and her face went white. I didn't have to say a word. The weight of that 18-year lie was heavy enough to crush us both. Story 7. I always knew my family was weird about secrets. My mom would stop talking the second I walked into a room. My dad had a locked filing cabinet in his office that was more heavily guarded than Fort Knox. They called it being private. I called it living in a house full of ghosts. But the full realization of how bad it was came in the form of a Facebook friend request. I was 19, home from my first year of college. The request was from a woman named Susan, with no mutual friends and a profile picture of a golden retriever. I was about to delete it when a message popped up. "Are you David and Karen's daughter?" It read. I confirmed, cautiously. Her next message hit me like a physical blow. "I think I might be your older sister." My world tilted on its axis. I was an only child. I had always been an only child. It was a core part of my identity. I spent my childhood begging for a sibling. A wish my parents always met with sad smiles and vague excuses about it, not being in the cards. This had to be a scam, a cruel joke. But she started sending details. Things only someone who knew my parents would know. The name of their first dog. The street they lived on before I was born. The proof that shattered my entire reality was a photo she sent me. It was of my dad, young and smiling, holding a baby with my exact same eyes. My mom was nowhere in the picture. I printed the photo and the messages. I walked into the living room, where my parents were watching TV, and I just dropped the papers onto the coffee table. The silence was deafening. My dad's face went white. My mom started crying, not for me, but for herself. The story came out in a torrent of shame and excuses. My dad had a child with his high school girlfriend before he met my mom. When they got together, my mom couldn't handle the shame of him having a past, of him having another family. So they paid the other woman to go away, to move across the country, and to never contact them again. They erased her. They hadn't just kept a secret from me. They had actively erased a human being from our lives. From my life. My sister, for 2 decades. I had a sister I never knew existed because of my mother's insecurity and my father's cowardice. They chose to build their perfect little family on a foundation of lies and a child they threw away. The karma is simple but devastating for them. My sister and I are inseparable now. We talk every day. This summer, I'm flying out to meet her family. My nieces and nephews. My parents. In their desperate attempt to keep their perfect, tiny family intact, ended up creating a new, bigger family that has absolutely no room for them. Story 8. My mom competed with me. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things. If I got a new dress, she'd say, "Oh, that's cute. I had something just like that when I was your age, but my waist was smaller." If I was excited about a good grade, she'd bring up one of her long-past career achievements. It was subtle, a constant, low-level effort to remind me that she was, and always would be, the main character. As I got into my late teens and early 20s, it escalated. She started borrowing my clothes without asking, dyeing her hair the same color as mine, and befriending my friends on social media and commenting on all their posts. It was mortifying. My friends thought it was so cool that my mom was so young at heart. I just felt a creeping sense of dread. She wasn't trying to be my friend. She was trying to be me. The relationship I had with my first serious boyfriend, Mark, was the battlefield where the war really started. She was overtly flirty with him. She'd laugh a little too loud at his jokes, touch his arm when she talked to him, and always make sure to wear something revealing when he came over. I told myself I was being crazy, jealous, and insecure. It was my mom. The turning point was my 21st birthday. Mark and I had planned a weekend trip to a romantic little cabin. I was so excited. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, my mom called me, sobbing hysterically. She and my dad had a huge fight, and she'd left him. She had nowhere to go. Could she please just stay in my tiny apartment for a few days? Of course. I canceled my trip. I spent my 21st birthday on my lumpy couch while my mom slept in my bed. Recovering, I held her while she cried and told me what a horrible man my father was. Mark was understanding, but disappointed. The real horror show happened a week later. I went to my parents' house to pick up some of my old books. My dad let me in. He looked confused. "Fight?" he asked. "We didn't have a fight. Your mother said she was spending the weekend with you for your birthday because you were feeling lonely." I felt my stomach plummet to the floor. And then I saw it. On the kitchen counter was a reservation confirmation. For the exact same cabin I had booked. For 2 people. It was for the weekend after my birthday. The reservation was in Mark's name. She hadn't just sabotaged my birthday. She had tried to steal my boyfriend, using a fake marital crisis as a cover. I confronted Mark, and he broke down. He said she'd been texting him for weeks, telling him I was too immature for him, and that he needed a real woman. He never went through with it. But the fact he even considered it was enough. I dumped him and cut my mother out of my life completely. The karmic justice? My dad finally saw the depth of her narcissism and left her. Now she's all alone, with no one left to compete with. Story 9. My dad's obsession was our front lawn. It was a perfect emerald green rectangle, completely free of weeds, dandelions, or even a single fallen leaf. He called it the velvet carpet. Our family life revolved around its maintenance. Every Saturday, I was his little assistant. We had bizarre rituals. I wasn't just mowing. I had to measure the blade height. I wasn't just watering. I had to use a specific spray nozzle and count to 30 for each section. He was a mild-mannered man in every other aspect of his life. But the lawn brought out something dark in him. If a neighborhood kid's ball rolled onto it, he'd stare them down until they scurried away in fear. One time, I accidentally left a sprinkler on too long and created a small, muddy patch. He didn't speak to me for 3 days. My mom would just sigh and say, "Just let him have his lawn. It's the one thing he can control." I always thought it was just a weird quirk, a harmless obsession. But when I was 15, things got strange. He started a new project, installing a high-tech sprinkler system. It required digging trenches all over the lawn. He insisted on doing it himself, by hand, and refused to let me help. He would dig late at night, under the glow of a single floodlight, his face tight with concentration. This is where it gets weird. One night, I saw him pull something out of the ground near the old oak tree. It was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox. He quickly looked around, then carried it into the garage. The next day, he was a different person. He was giddy, almost manic. He told me I didn't have to help with the lawn anymore and gave me a $100 bill. He told my mom he was taking her on a cruise. The lawn, his life's work, was suddenly forgotten. The trenches stayed half dug for weeks. This sudden change was more unsettling than his obsession had ever been. Curiosity got the better of me. I went into the garage and found the box hidden under a pile of old tarps. It wasn't locked. Inside wasn't money or anything valuable. It was filled with old letters, a faded photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, and a man's silver ring. I also found a folded, yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local woman vanishes, fiancé questioned." The man in the article's photo was a younger version of my father. He hadn't been protecting his lawn. He had been guarding a grave. The woman was his ex-fiancée from before he met my mom. She had disappeared mysteriously 25 years ago. He had buried his past, literally, under our perfect family life. The sprinkler project wasn't about upgrading the lawn. It was about moving the evidence because our new neighbors were planning to build a fence right on the property line. I never said a word. I just packed a bag, took the bus to my grandma's house, and called an anonymous tip line from a payphone. The last I saw of my father, he was on the evening news, standing silently as police dug up our velvet carpet. Story 10. When I was 15 and discovered my mom had been catfishing my boyfriends for 2 years, I found dozens of fake social media accounts she'd created, each with stolen photos of attractive girls my age. She'd been messaging every guy I'd ever shown interest in, pretending to be different girls trying to steal them away from me. It started when I mentioned liking Jake from chemistry class. Within days, Jake was getting messages from Emily, a gorgeous brunette who went to a nearby school. Emily flirted relentlessly, asked him on dates, and sent suggestive photos my mom had found online. When Jake inevitably chose Emily over me, my mom would comfort me, saying boys my age weren't mature enough to appreciate me yet. This pattern repeated with every crush I had. David fell for Sophia. Marcus was seduced by Isabella. Each time, I'd be heartbroken and confused why these perfect girls kept appearing to steal my potential boyfriends. Mom would hold me while I cried, reinforcing her narrative that teenage boys were shallow and unreliable. I only discovered the truth when I caught her on her phone, logged into Madison's account while texting my latest crush, Ryan. She'd been mid-conversation, sending him flirty messages and planning a meetup that would never happen. When I confronted her, she didn't even look embarrassed. Her explanation was worse than the deception itself. She claimed she was protecting me from heartbreak and teaching me valuable lessons about male nature. She said teenage relationships were distractions from my studies, and she was helping me focus on my future by eliminating romantic complications. She was proud of her elaborate scheme. But the real devastation came when I realized how deeply this had damaged my self-worth. for years. I'd believed I was inherently unlovable, that any guy I liked would immediately find someone better. I'd internalized the idea that I wasn't pretty enough, interesting enough, or worthy of teenage romance. My mom had systematically destroyed my confidence while positioning herself as my only reliable support system. I'm 23 now, and still struggle with relationships. Every time someone shows interest, I wonder if they're real, or if someone is manipulating the situation. I've had to unlearn years of believing I'm not enough, and I'm still working on trusting my own judgment about people's intentions. The cruelest part is that my mom genuinely thought she was being a good parent. Story 11. When I was 16, my dad started making me compete with my younger brother for basic necessities, not as a game or a lesson about sharing, as a literal competition with winners and losers and real consequences. It started with small things. If we both wanted the last piece of pizza, Dad would make us arm wrestle for it. If we both needed new shoes, we'd have to compete in some kind of challenge, math problems, push-ups, trivia questions, and only the winner would get shoes that month. Dad called it natural selection in action. He said the real world was competitive, and he was preparing us for success. The strong would thrive, the weak would learn to get stronger. Very survival of the fittest mentality. My brother Jake was 2 years younger but bigger and stronger than me. He usually won the physical challenges. I was better at academic stuff, so I'd win those competitions. But Dad started favoring physical contests because he said they were more real-world applicable. The competitions escalated quickly. We'd compete for who got to use the car on weekends, who got to pick the family vacation destination, who got the bigger bedroom when we moved houses, who got to stay up later on school nights. Everything became a contest. But here's where it got really messed up. Dad started taking away things from the loser to give to the winner. If Jake won the weekly competition, he'd get my allowance in addition to his own. If I won, I'd get his video games or his favorite snacks. We weren't just competing for new things. We were competing to keep what we already had. This created a horrible dynamic between Jake and me. We went from being normal siblings to being actual enemies. We'd sabotage each other's school projects, hide each other's belongings, and look for any opportunity to make the other person fail. The worst part was that Dad seemed to enjoy watching us fight. He'd escalate conflicts between us, take sides unpredictably, and reward the brother who was more ruthless in competition. The breaking point came when Jake got accepted to a summer camp that I really wanted to attend. Instead of just letting him go, Dad made us compete for the spot. It was a week-long series of challenges, academic tests, physical contests, even a presentation about why we deserved the opportunity more. I won, but when I got to camp, I found out the truth that changed everything. The camp counselor mentioned how generous my dad had been, paying for both Jake and me to attend. There had never been just one spot available. Dad had manufactured the entire competition. He'd made us destroy our relationship over something that was never actually scarce. When I confronted him, he just shrugged and said it had been good practice for us. That life was about competing for limited resources, and we needed to learn how to win. I realized then that he'd been using artificial scarcity to manipulate us for years, making us fight over things he could have easily provided to both of us, teaching us that love, resources, and opportunities were zero-sum games where someone always had to lose. Jake and I didn't speak for 3 years after that summer. We're slowly rebuilding our relationship now. But it's hard to undo years of conditioning that made us see each other as threats instead of teammates. I'm 23 now, and I still struggle with competitive situations. I either avoid them completely or get way too aggressive because I learned that everything was a fight for survival. Dad's natural selection experiment just created 2 kids who didn't know how to cooperate or trust each other. Story 12. When I was 12, my parents started making me earn my emotions. Not earn rewards or privileges. Earn the right to feel sad, angry, or upset about things that happened to me. It began with a point system. Every time I expressed a negative emotion, I'd lose points. Crying about a bad grade, -5 points. Getting frustrated with homework, -3 points. Being disappointed about canceled plans, -2 points. But if I wanted to feel those emotions legitimately, I had to earn points first through positive behaviors. Cleaning my room earned me 2 sadness points. Getting good grades earned me 5 anger points. Helping with dishes earned me 1 disappointment point. They kept a literal chart on the refrigerator tracking my emotional credits and debits. If I was in the negative, I wasn't allowed to express any negative feelings until I'd worked my way back to 0 or positive. Mom explained that this was teaching me emotional regulation and resilience, that successful people didn't let negative emotions control their lives, and I needed to learn to earn my feelings through positive action. The system was insane. If something genuinely upsetting happened, like my dog getting sick or a friend betraying my trust, I had to check my point balance before I was allowed to be sad about it. If I was in emotional debt, I had to just smile and pretend everything was fine until I'd earned enough credits. But here's what made me realize how psychologically damaging this was. When I was 13, my grandmother died. I was devastated. She'd been my closest family member, the person who actually listened to me and understood me. I wanted to grieve, to cry, to process this enormous loss. But I was 12 points in the negative because I'd gotten frustrated about a math test earlier that week. According to the chart, I wasn't allowed to be sad about Grandma's death until I'd done enough positive behaviors to earn sadness points. My parents made me clean the entire house, organize the garage, and write thank you notes to family friends before I was permitted to cry about losing the most important person in my life. I had to earn the right to grieve my own grandmother. At the funeral, I sat there with a fake smile because I still hadn't accumulated enough points for public sadness. Family members kept commenting on how strong and mature I was being. They had no idea I was emotionally bankrupt according to my parents' twisted system. The breaking point came when my school counselor called my parents about my unusual emotional responses. I'd started having panic attacks because I was so disconnected from my own feelings. I couldn't tell what I was actually experiencing versus what I was allowed to experience. The counselor was horrified when she learned about the point system. She explained that emotions aren't behaviors to be regulated through rewards and punishment. They're natural human responses that help us process experiences and connect with others. My parents were furious that I'd embarrassed the family by discussing our private system with an outsider. They grounded me and took away 20 points for disloyalty. But they quietly discontinued the chart after the school threatened to call social services. The damage was already done, though. I'd spent 2 crucial years learning that my feelings were wrong, inconvenient, and had to be earned through good behavior. I couldn't trust my emotional responses because I'd been taught they were selfish and inappropriate. I'm 19 now, and still in therapy trying to reconnect with my emotions. I have to consciously remind myself that it's okay to feel sad, angry, or disappointed without first proving I deserve those feelings. Some lessons are harder to unlearn than others. Story 13. When I was 13, my parents started charging me rent. Not fake money or chore-based allowance. Real rent, $200 a month, due on the 1st, with late fees if I was behind. They called it life preparation. Dad sat me down with an actual lease agreement he'd printed off the internet. I had to sign it. It covered use of my bedroom, access to common areas, utilities, and internet. There were rules about overnight guests, not allowed, noise levels after 9 p.m., and keeping shared spaces clean. At first, I thought it was kinda cool. I felt grown up having my own lease, my own responsibilities. I started babysitting more to make the rent money. I'd count out 20s on the kitchen counter every month like I was playing house. But then they started adding fees. $25 for leaving dishes in the sink overnight. $15 for not taking out the trash on my assigned day. $50 for having a friend over without 24-hour written notice. Every infraction came with a formal invoice that I had to pay within 48 hours. The worst part was the inspection. Every month, Mom would walk through my room with a clipboard, checking for damages, cleanliness violations, and lease compliance. She'd dock my security deposit for things like thumbtack holes in the walls or water rings on my dresser. My friends thought it was insane. Their parents bought them clothes and school supplies without itemized receipts. Mine made me submit a monthly budget showing how I planned to afford necessities like shampoo and notebooks. But here's what finally made me realize how messed up this was. When I was 15, I got really sick with pneumonia. I was in the hospital for 4 days. When I got home, there was an eviction notice taped to my bedroom door. I'd missed rent while I was literally unconscious in the ICU, and they were threatening to remove my belongings and change the locks. I had to negotiate a payment plan for the back rent plus late fees, while recovering from pneumonia. At 15 years old, my pediatrician was the one who finally intervened. During a follow-up appointment, I mentioned the rent situation casually, thinking it was normal. She asked to speak with my parents privately, and I could hear her raised voice through the examination room door. Turns out, charging your minor child actual rent is considered financial abuse in our state. The doctor threatened to report my parents to social services if they didn't stop immediately. They were furious with me for embarrassing the family and making them look like bad parents. They stopped charging rent, but started charging me for everything else instead. Groceries, electricity usage, car rides to school. They kept detailed spreadsheets of every cost associated with my existence. I moved out the day I turned 18. I'd saved enough money from babysitting to get my own place, and I knew how to budget and pay bills because I'd been doing it since middle school. Now I'm 22 and I still check my bank account obsessively, terrified of late fees or unexpected charges. I guess their life preparation worked, just not in the way they intended.